had a deer-like head with antlers, but its skin was falling off like it was rotten, and where the eyes should be was just black sockets. Welcome back, or if you're new here, welcome to Dark Secrets. You just got a teaser of what's to come. Cryptid stories told in immersive story format. Whether you're alone, with friends and family, or just comfy in bed, these cryptid stories are going to scratch that itch. This is a compilation of our last 4 episodes combined. That's enough waiting. Let's get into these stories. Encounter 1. A dogman stalked me. I have wanted to get this story off my chest for years. I figure doing it anonymously on the internet is the best way to preserve my reputation. I don't want to be seen as the local kook. It was 1987. I was 26 years old and went on a solo camping trip up in the Rocky Mountains near the city of Creed. I hiked off the road for about an hour until I reached a nice secluded clearing that looked suitable for a camp. Now, little did I know, this would be my last trip in the woods for the rest of my life. I got the tent set up and a small fire built. I remember kicking back against a large piece of firewood and just playing my harmonica, enjoying the peace and the serenity. I remember hearing a loud snap, like a large tree branch broke. It was so loud it physically made me jump. My harmonica fell to the ground. I nervously looked at the direction, but I couldn't see a thing. My mind began to race with what it could have been. Maybe a bear was trying to climb a tree and a branch broke, or maybe an old tree finally just gave up and fell down. Just as I started to settle, I heard a low, chest-rattling growl, just out of sight in the tree line. You know how lions roar at the zoo and vibrate your chest? I felt that from this thing's growl. I leaped in the tent and grabbed my handgun. I just sat inside, gripping it tightly for hours. I don't recall ever falling asleep, just seeing the morning light start to appear through my thin tent material. I cautiously looked out, and all seemed normal. I decided that freaked me out enough. I wanted to pack up camp today and head back to the truck. As I was packing, I heard another large branch snap. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, as if this was confirmation that last night was no tricks of the night or a dream. I just grabbed my pack and left the rest of my gear and started speed walking towards the truck, which was the opposite direction of the noise I heard. After what had only been maybe 10 or 15 seconds, I heard that growl again. Only this time, it was not too far off beside me. This thing just covered a huge distance, impossibly fast, and without making a noise. My walk slowed to a paralyzingly slow pace as I scanned the underbrush. Then I saw it. Deep, fiery red eyes peering at me through some bushes. It knew when I spotted it, because as soon as we locked eyes, it slowly stood up. I could feel my stomach move into my throat as I watched it slowly stand, getting taller and taller. It must have been 7 feet tall. It had a wolf-like head with terrifying yet intelligent eyes. Its body was heavy with bulging muscles. It was exactly what you would think of if someone said werewolf. After a moment, it started to look irritated and took one single step towards me. My fight or flight kicked in, and it was most definitely flight. My legs started carrying me faster than I ever thought possible. The trees and the brush was a blur as I ran through the forest. I do recall falling a handful of times. It's not that easy running through terrain like that. But I sprang back up each time and just kept going. I ran until my lungs felt like they were gonna burst. I slowed to a walk, breathing deeply. And I'll be damned if I heard it again let out another growl, maybe 30 yards straight beside me. It followed me, and obviously had no issue keeping up. And again, quietly, a new spike of adrenaline kicked in and I started running again. That thing would snap a branch every couple minutes, just as if it was trying to remind me it was there, keeping my adrenaline high enough to just keep going until I eventually made it to my truck. I remember how bad my lungs hurt, my teeth hurt, and I was spitting blood. I ran myself so hard. My heart felt like it was close to just pounding straight out of my chest. I never went camping again since. I get nervous just driving through the mountains to this day. Nervously watching everywhere, just knowing I'm gonna see this thing again. Encounter 2, an Angry Bigfoot. Hello, my story is fairly short, but it has changed my life and what I believe. It's opened my mind that there are things in this world that are hidden from us, and we are not taught in schools. When I was 14, my dad took me with him to go camping up by Marble Mountain in California. We were only going for a single night to get away from the city life. It had rained for 6 days straight, and this was the first break in the weather. I was protesting the whole day. I hated how muddy it was, and I didn't want to walk off the trail where it wasn't muddy because I wanted to wear shorts. I know, 14-year-old problems. I remember my dad veering off the trail as if his full attention was on something that caught his eye. When I got up to where he went off the trail, I could see what he was now standing by and looking at. It was a crude shelter of sticks leaned against each other with a few pine branches over it. I remember it reeked like wet dog and skunk. My dad's best guess was it was a homeless man who made a shelter from all the recent rain and once abandoned, a skunk or something claimed it as their own. Now, although he made a rational explanation, I remember I wasn't so sure, and I don't think he was either, because he decided we were making camp not 100 yards from that little shelter. I'm sure so he could check it out again or get a glimpse of what was going in it. We got our answer that night. Shortly after sundown, we both heard a loud thump, like a large piece of wood hitting a tree. A loud, heavy thump. Then a second, and a third. And I asked my dad what that was. His reply shook me to my core. I don't know I've ever heard anything like that, and I can't think of anything that can make that noise. Then my dad caught a glimpse of something. I saw his eyes widen and his face go pale. The very look on his face had me terrified. And then he told me, "Get in the tent now." I did as he told me, and he followed in shortly thereafter. Then, just a few moments later, I froze as I heard something rummaging through things in camp. It wasn't trying to be quiet. It was making quite the ruckus, to be honest. Then, something from camp was thrown, and it hit the tent. I let out a small yelp when my dad immediately covered my mouth. The noise outside the tent stopped, and it was eerily quiet. All I could imagine was it was looking right at the tent, slowly moving towards me. I was shaking. Then after a minute or so, the noise in camp started again. We heard that thing rummage around our tent, making a lot of noise all night. At daybreak, my dad poked his head out. He looked back at me and said, "It looks clear. We're going back to the car now." We left our gear and tent and got out of there. I tried to get my dad to tell me what he saw for years, but he refused. Until one day, when I was about 22 years old, I asked him again. He sighed and said, "I don't want to scare you, but I suppose you're old enough now, and I'm tired of you asking me for all these years." When I looked towards those trees, I was able to make out half an outline of something, standing on two legs. It had extremely wide shoulders. It must have been 8 feet tall. At first I thought it was something in the night that was just being distorted and playing tricks on me. That's when it moved. It stepped sideways the rest of the way behind a tree. That's when you saw my face turn white. After all these years, the only thing I can come up with is that this was a Bigfoot, and that was his shelter, and he wanted us gone. Hey guys, real quick before we get into my personal favorite story of the night. If you're enjoying how we tell real cryptid reported encounters in an immersive format, please drop a like, hit that subscribe button, and leave a comment down below. These quick, simple steps help Dark Secrets so much, so in advance, thank you for your support. Now let's get into this last story. Encounter 3, a hunter and a wendigo. It was 1990. I was heading out to go deer hunting in Virginia. It was rifle season, and I was eager to get to the stand. Little did I know, this day was going to haunt me for the rest of my life. I got to my stand about 2 hours before sundown, got settled, and started watching and listening. I remember how unusually quiet it was that evening. No birds, no rabbits, no obnoxious squirrels making a racket. just dead silence. The sun had fully set. Shooting time was over. But just before I was going to climb down, I heard something rustling right under my stand. I looked down and I saw a huge rack. At first I thought, oh, that figures. Right as shooting time's over, a big buck literally walks under my stand. Then I felt my stand shake. I looked down again and this deer was standing on its back 2 legs, and it was shaking my ladder. Then the smell hit me. It smelled like a rotting carcass. I gagged when I smelled it. I reached for my flashlight, and when I shined it down towards the animal, my skin crawled. It had a deer-like head with antlers, but its skin was falling off like it was rotten, and where the eyes should be was just black sockets with coal red circles in the center. The body looked mostly like a deer, except the skin was rotting off, and the limbs were just bizarre looking, the way they contorted for it to stand upright. My ladder started shaking more violently. I pointed my rifle straight down. I was carrying a .270 that day, a solid, strong round for taking down deer. I aimed right at the top of this thing's head and pulled the trigger, and I hit exactly where I was aiming. And this thing took a few steps back, shaking its head, then came right back to the base of my tree. What little security I felt was I had my gun, and now that security was gone. This thing just ate a headshot like I dropped an acorn on its head. I started shaking my ladder again, and again I put another round straight down into this thing, with a similar result of it just shaking it off like I threw something at it. It did, however, stop shaking my stand after the second shot. It just circled my tree, at times pausing and just looking up at me for minutes at a time before resuming its pace around my tree. After a couple hours, my flashlight died. I was terrified before, but now I was trembling. I don't know what was worse, hearing it and not seeing it, or when it stopped moving and I could hear nothing. I sat through that terror all night until dawn. At daybreak, the creature was gone. I went down my stand and ran faster than I thought humanly possible back to my truck. I have not hunted or stepped foot in the woods since. That night traumatized me. I have night terrors reliving that night to this day. I haven't sought therapy because I don't want people to think I'm crazy. It's terrible experiencing the unexplainable and having to live with it in silence. Thank you for giving me a way to tell my story. It was 1735, deep in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, when Jane, mother, Leeds, discovered she was pregnant with her 13th child. "Let this one be the devil," she allegedly cursed. While there are many versions of the Jersey Devil's lore, the most popular is this. When Leeds' 13th child was born, it grew wings, horns, hooves, and a tail. Leeds kept the monster captive until it eventually escaped its confinement and flew up the chimney and out into the night. One of the first reported Jersey Devil sightings was in 1812, when Joseph Bonaparte, Napoleon's older brother, claimed he saw the Jersey Devil while hunting near his Bordentown estate. Sightings occurred and the legend grew, fueled by animal attacks, strange footprints, and reports filed by eyewitnesses who supposedly encountered the beast. The Jersey Devil's fame solidified itself in January of 1909, when nearly 1,000 reports came in from eyewitnesses throughout South Jersey. While testing cannonballs at Hanover Mills Works in Pine Barrens, Navy Commander Stephen Decatur reportedly saw the creature and shot it. The cannonball blew a hole in the devil, but it wasn't fazed by the projectile. Strange tracks were found in fields, but bloodhounds allegedly refused to follow the tracks. The kids were fine with it all though, because schools were actually closed due to these reports. Forest rangers are experts on the wildlife that inhabits the woods they patrol. But in 1980, Wharton State Forest Chief Ranger Alan McFarlane saw something that both grossed him out and stumped his wild animal knowledge. A brutal scene on a South Jersey farm, where a pack of pigs had been killed. He reported that the backs of their heads were eaten and their bodies were scratched and torn. However, There were no tracks surrounding the bodies and no blood on the ground. There are many reports on the Jersey Devil online. If you'd like to see an exclusive video on the Jersey Devil, let me know down in the comments below. Now let's get into that Thunderbird story. The biggest champion of the Thunderbirds was Hiram Cranmer, a retired postmaster who lived in Leedy Township, Clinton County, Pennsylvania. Cranmer was sort of a connoisseur of the weird, often discussing ghosts, UFOs, and monsters. He claimed to have seen his first Thunderbird in 1922 and 4 others after that. It seemed the Thunderbirds had a tendency to inhabit northern Clinton County and southern Potter County, which, to be fair, is a pretty remote area. A large flock of Thunderbirds could pretty easily be hiding up there. Once there was even said to have been a photo of a Thunderbird. According to the story, some men managed to kill one, nail it to a barn, and take a black and white photo while they posed in front of it. The photo, now missing, has become known as the Lost Thunderbird photo, and is itself a story of legend. It may have ended with Cranmer. Researcher Ivan Sanderson claimed to have left the photo with Cranmer when he visited in 1963. Cranmer died when his house burned down in 1967, possibly taking the Thunderbird photo with it. In Lyman's book, he hints at this as well, mentioning that that photo was burned in the home. Thunderbird sightings have gone back hundreds of years, starting with the Native Americans. Native Americans say that when you see a Thunderbird, it means there's a storm coming. The most incredible part is, reports are up to 70 feet in wingspan on these birds. Today, guys, I've got 4 encounter stories for you that I thought were fascinating. And stick around to the last one. It's about a park ranger who knows he has a local area Bigfoot and he's trying to protect him. Now let's get into these stories. Encounter 1. Bigfoot Protected Me. Casey Hathaway, 3 years old, was playing with 2 children at his grandmother's house in the North Carolina woods. When the grandmother checked on them, she didn't see Casey and asked the other 2 children where he was. They said he just disappeared a couple minutes ago and they can't find him. After the grandmother frantically yelled and did a quick search for Casey, she got the local police on the phone and a massive search party was launched. Search teams responded quickly. It should have been an easy search as the woods are thick and a 3-year-old could not have gotten far. The main concern was the small river or creek near the property that could possibly drown the boy. The search team covered a large area multiple times around the home, slowly expanding each time, and never saw a trace of Casey for 48 hours. When hope was almost lost, Casey was heard calling for his mom. Mom! Only a quarter mile away and only about 50 yards deep in the woods, in an area that was already thoroughly searched by rescuers. Rescuers had to cross a stream previously mentioned, and it was over waist deep and moving. Rescuers were dumbfounded how this 3-year-old crossed the stream. When they got to Casey, he was tangled in thorn bushes and very cold. When asked what happened, Casey told his mother and the authorities, both separately, the exact same story. A bear man stayed with me and kept me safe. Encounter 2. The Bigfoot Who Bears Gifts. It was 2004 in Washington State. I went up to the lake house with enough provisions to stay out there most of the winter. On my second night, I heard a knocking out in the woods as I went out to get some firewood. It was a strange sound, like something heavy, maybe hitting wood or a tree. I thought it was odd because my closest neighbor was a mile away, and they only stayed at their place during the summer. The next evening, I went out and again, the knocking started, and this time, much closer. I trained my eye on the tree line, and a massive figure stepped halfway out. It was tall, very tall, and we're both just looking at each other. And then just as fast as it appeared, it was gone. I was amazed and terrified. I never really believed in Bigfoot, but how do I explain what I just clearly saw? It was standing on 2 legs and it had an ape-like face. This was no bear. The next day I went out trout fishing and caught my limit pretty quickly. On my way back up to the house, I heard that knocking again. I couldn't see him, but I knew he could see me. Now I'm not sure at the time what made me do it, but I just yelled out, "You hungry?" and held a fish up in the air and then placed it on the firewood cutting stump. think I just did it out of pure nervousness. The next morning, the fish was gone, and there was a dead rabbit on my front porch right in front of my door. I was freaked out. Did it just trade with me? And was it really on my front porch? Again, out of my nervousness, not wanting to anger it, I took the rabbit in. I didn't eat it, but at least it shows what I thought was a mutual respect and understanding that this was a trade. This went on most of the winter. I'd hear it knocking, but never saw it again. The occasional dead animal would show up on my doorstep, and I'd leave some food from the house out in return. It never did anything threatening, and I genuinely believe it was just curious and probably enjoying the food it was trading me for. As it started warming up, the nighttime knocking and random animals on my porch started getting less and less frequent. By the time I was ready to leave, I hadn't seen a sign of it for a couple weeks. The next winter, I was so excited to get back out there and see if he would return. Only a couple of nights I heard a far-off knock. No more animals showed up on my porch. It was such a unique experience that I am thrilled I was able to be part of. Encounter 3. Series of short reported encounters. A Bigfoot sighting became a federal investigation when a man fired his weapon inside a national park in Kentucky. A backcountry camper at Mammoth Cave National Park in western Kentucky said a man approached him and mentioned he had heard some strange noises nearby. When the camper heard gunfire a few minutes later, it was the man shooting at a Bigfoot that he said stepped out from behind some trees. A pair of Bigfoot hunters were hot on the trail of the cryptid outside Houston, Texas in 2015. But they soon realized the creature was unhappy with their presence. As they began their overnight hunt, the lead investigator realized that something was throwing full-size logs at them from the tree line. They then reported that the creature ran away. Hikers in Frisco, Colorado were taking a break when they saw something strange on the snow-covered mountains above them. At about 11,000 feet of elevation, they watched a dark figure fall. The hikers immediately began hiking up to the place where they had seen the fall. But all they had found was a series of huge footprints and handprints in the snow. Encounter 4. The park ranger protects him. I was hiking a remote trail in the Colorado mountains when I took a rugged detour to see a waterfall. I could hear the waterfall in the distance, and as I got closer, I noticed an animal near the base of the waterfall. At first, I thought it was a black bear, as it was fairly low to the ground and hunched over the water. Then it stood up on its two legs. I've seen a lot of black bears on my hikes, and yes, I know they can stand on their back legs too, but this was not a black bear. It must have been 8 feet tall, with long arms, and a more of a primate-shaped face and head. This was not a black bear. As I continued staring, it turned and looked right at me, which only confirmed what I already believed. This was not a bear. It did not look startled, but more annoyed than anything as it disappeared into the trees, as if my presence interrupted it from whatever it was doing. I was too scared to go down to the waterfall and just stood there stunned for some time, trying to process what I had just seen. I turned and started making my way back to the car. Once I got near my car, a park ranger pulled up. I must have looked distressed or something, because the first thing he asked me was if I was okay. I responded with a weak, "Yeah, I'm fine." The ranger pressed a little further. "Are you sure you're okay?" I couldn't resist anymore. I had to tell him. I went down to the waterfall and I think I saw Bigfoot. The park ranger had a slight smile and said, "Oh, you mean the local black bear?" I immediately responded with, "No, I've seen many black bears. This stood up on two legs. It was 8 feet tall and looked nothing like a bear." The park ranger again said, "The woods can be deceiving. It was likely a black bear." I started to argue again, but he cut me off. It was a black bear, and that's what we tell our friends so we can keep our local black bear safe. He raised his eyebrows and looked at me. I understood now where he was coming from. He knows there's a Bigfoot around and he's trying to keep it safe. I had to tell my story. I couldn't keep it in. I just left the location vague to still keep my word to some degree. Today we got 3 short Dogman encounters that were thrilling. And the last one actually shocked me because there's a twist in it I have yet to see. Let's get into these stories. Encounter 1, the Dogman's Kill. It was 1997 up in Colorado mountains. My friend, we'll call him Earl, and I was up there to go elk hunting. What we saw on this trip ensured I'd never step foot in the woods again. I'll skip the hike and all that. Just know we were in damn good shape and hiked off the road for almost 3 hours to get to our spot. We set up camp and had a pretty uneventful first night. The next morning, we discussed where we would each set up and watch for elk, and headed out our separate ways. About 20 minutes into my walk, I noticed a carcass. I went to investigate and it was fresh, real fresh. It was a white-tailed deer. The problem, however, was I never saw an animal mutilated like this. It had 3 deep gashes, evenly spread out, as if claws ripped through this thing's back. But even more oddly, the neck was contorted and had been broken. The intestines were sprawled out on the ground, and when I bent down to take a closer look, it appeared the heart, lungs, liver, and other organs were eaten. I have no idea what could have done this, and it spooked me. When Earl and I met up back at camp later that day, I told him about the deer. He was just as bewildered as I was. That night, we were sitting by the fire discussing what maybe it could have been. Mountain lion, I asked, but I've never seen a mountain lion leave claw marks like that. And the broken neck was completely unexplainable. Plus the fact only certain organs were ate, we were stumped. At the butt crack of dawn, I took Earl over to look at the deer. As we got near it, we saw something black hunched over it. Our first instinct was black bear. Then it just stopped what it was doing. It froze, and then it let out a deep growl as it slowly stood up. It was now on 2 legs, covered in hair. Its arms were long with large claws. It slowly turned while still growling. It must have been 7 feet tall. When its gaze met mine, I was stunned. It had a head like a wolf with menacing eyes. I snapped out of my shock to the sound of a gunshot. Earl pulled up his rifle and shot this thing. It let out a howl in pain, then started sprinting towards us impossibly fast. We both raised our rifles and fired. The beast stumbled and let out another howl in pain and then changed directions and disappeared into the woods. Now, need I remind you, we were both elk hunting. We had 338 rifles. This thing just ate 3 rounds. Earl and I didn't say a word. We both knew what the other was thinking. Let's get the hell out of here. We went straight back to camp, got the necessities, and hiked out. I never returned to the woods. It took Earl a couple of years and he started hunting again, but he never went back to that area. Encounter 2, the Dogman in the farmhouse. My story is pretty short, but it made me a believer and I feel like it needs to be heard. My wife and I have a country home on about 20 acres out in eastern Iowa. We used it as a getaway home during the summer when we can. The previous year we had one bad thing after the next happen to us and we was never able to make it out. So the house has now sat 2 years without being cleaned. 2 weeks before we planned to be there for a month, my wife decided she was going to drive up Friday night, clean all day Saturday, then drive home Sunday. She wanted our month up there to be as relaxing as possible and didn't want to have to worry about cleaning. It was about an 8-hour drive. My wife arrived at the home around midnight on Friday. I felt a sense of relief when I heard my phone ring because I knew she made it okay. But when I answered the phone, my wife was hysterical and in tears. "What's wrong?" I asked. All she could say was an animal got in the house and wrecked it, and she could hear something in the basement. I told her to get in the bedroom and lock the door, get the shotgun from the closet. I'm on my way. By the time I got to the house, it was 8:30 a.m. and the sun was out. It was a terrible 8-hour drive because we didn't have cell phones yet in the late 80s. My wife ran out to me as I pulled in the drive, shotgun still in hand. I gave her a hug, so happy she was okay. She handed me the shotgun and said, "It's still in the basement. and it sounds big. I charged inside, and she was right. The house was a mess. Furniture flipped, curtains down, and 3 huge claw marks in the trim around the door that leads to the basement. I cracked the basement door open. Before I could even adjust my eyes, something smashed into the door, knocking me to the ground, and my shotgun went flying. I heard my wife let out a scream as I reoriented myself. I saw a creature covered in black fur running on 2 legs through the kitchen as it smashed straight through the door and ran across the pasture at a mind-blowing speed. As I stood up, I noticed that my wife was in shock, just gasping for air, staring wide-eyed out the door. I wrapped her up in my arms and asked her if she was okay. Her response made my blood run cold. She said, "It looked at me. It had a dog or wolf head with glowing yellow eyes. All I felt was fear and dread." We left the home that day and shortly thereafter sold our little peace of mind getaway. And we sold it dirt cheap, I add. I did put in the description of the ad that there was a large wild animal breaking in. I wasn't going to completely screw someone over. The buyer called me shortly after purchase and asked for a description of the animal. Reluctantly, I told him exactly what I saw, and his response shocked me. "Oh, that don't surprise me. Dogmen have been known to occupy abandoned shelters, or in this case, the house around these parts." I asked the man, "Is that what that thing was? A dogman?" The gentleman replied, "Yep, I've never seen one myself, but my grandfather always told us stories about them being around here when we were kids." Hey guys, real quick, before we get into this last story with the crazy twist, if you're enjoying how we tell cryptid encounters in an immersive format, please drop a like, hit that subscribe button, and leave a comment. I'd love to talk with you guys. These short actions help a small channel like Dark Secrets so much, so in advance, thank you for your support. Now let's get into this story. Encounter 3, the Dogman Protector. My boyfriend Mark was obsessed with everything cryptid. One evening he asked me if I wanted to go camping with him. He was going cryptid hunting again. He did this all the time, going out, trying to see a Dogman, Bigfoot, Wendigo, any cryptid. He believed in them all. I said yes, even though I didn't believe a single bit of his nonsense. I'd never been camping, and it sounded peaceful. That night we were sitting by the fire, and I had to pee. I went into the tree line, and just as I started to go, I heard a grunt or a growl right behind me, but between me and camp. I bolted up, pants still down, stumbling further into the trees, trying to pull my pants up and put distance between me and this thing. I heard branches break really close to me. I yelled out, "Mark, this isn't funny." And then my heart sank. I heard Mark call out. He was a long ways away. "What did you say?" I realized whatever this was, it wasn't Mark. Then more branches snapping. I ran again. My only direction choice was deeper into the woods. Then, right in front of me emerged a huge creature. I'm guessing 8 feet tall. It was standing on 2 legs and looked like a cross between a man and a gorilla. From what Mark always talked about, I'd say this was a Sasquatch. Then I heard something behind me, and as I turned, I saw it was another one. It was the one that corralled me away from camp. The realization hit that I was just lured and successfully trapped. I screamed at the top of my lungs for Mark. All I got in return was his voice, so faint and far, I couldn't even understand what he said. Then the 2 creatures started closing the gap, moving towards me together. My chest was tight. Panic has overtaken my entire body. Then a low, terrible growl came from my right. Before I could even see anything, something dashed right in front of me. It stood up in front of me, also on 2 legs. This one was different. It was a little shorter, with a wolf-like head, very muscular, and huge claws at the end of this thing's arms. I thought to myself, is this a dogman? Again, just going off all of Mark's ramblings. The 2 creatures took a couple steps back, then began to do circles as if looking for an opening. The dogman stayed within a foot or two of me, circling around me with his back to me, facing the two Sasquatch. One of the Sasquatch broke a large branch, then in return, the dogman put his arms straight out, spread out his claws, and let out a vicious growl. This charade went on for what felt like 5 to 10 minutes. Who knows how long it actually was. Then the Sasquatch slowly retreated. That's when the dogman turned and looked at me. Deep, burning yellow eyes pierced into my soul. I was numb, but I mustered a weak thank you. He let out a short, unthreatening grunt and nodded his head in the direction of camp. I immediately started heading that way, and I could feel him following me. It made me uneasy and comfortable at the same time. Once I reached camp, I looked back and saw nothing. Mark ran up to me and asked if I was okay. He said he went into the woods looking for me, but came back before he lost sight of the fire. I'm now bawling my eyes out and collapsed onto the ground. After a few minutes and Mark asking me nonstop what was wrong, I told him what had happened. Mark's eyes went cold. He stood up and started packing camp and said, "Come on, we're leaving." I thought he was doing it for our safety, so I helped him pack and we left. On the car ride home, he was dead quiet, and I could tell he was pissed. I finally asked him, "What's wrong?" He looked at me with hate in his eyes and said, "The one thing I'm passionate about, and you want to mock me." I was in shock. "Mock you?" I replied. "Yes, that whole charade you pulled back there was just a slap in my face, a ha-ha, you're a child for believing in cryptids. There is no way you saw a cryptid, let alone 3. I've been coming out here for years. We're done." I was disgusted. I didn't know what to say. When we got back to town, he dropped me off and cut all ties with me. And that's going to do it for today. As always, keep an open mind, and I'll see you in the next one.